Hello everyone, it's Kevin Annett. It's September 29th, and with the upcoming federal election, so-called, in Canada on October 19th, I've written a piece, a pre-election wake-up call, that I call Why Voting in Canada is an Act of Treason and Criminality. When I was barely 15 years old, I was nearly expelled from University Hill Secondary, where I went to school, after I loudly urged my fellow students not to pay their student council fees. It was my first overtly political act. Well, what prompted my call was that I had just learned, to my horror and chagrin, that our so-called democratically elected student council was in fact governed by one guy, an adult supervisor, the vice principal, who had to approve any of its decisions and who could summarily dismiss the entire student council if he so chose to do. Well, welcome to Canada, folks. None of my fellow students back then at University Hill seemed particularly concerned or wanting to have self-government, any more than do most Canadians today. My 15-year-old self was called nasty names and told to stop rocking the boat when he impudently suggested that those we elect should be accountable to us, and not to some omnipotent father figure. For adolescents and the Canadian electorate, they seem to prefer deferring to some august supervisor with the power to overrule their wishes, whether that shadow ruler be a vice principal or a governor general. After all, every member of parliament we elect, everyone, takes the same oath of allegiance and loyalty not to we the people or to a constitution, but to a single foreign ruler, a convicted criminal called Queen Elizabeth and all of her descendants. Well, in any responsible system of government, handing over one's authority to unaccountable servants of a foreign ruler is normally considered an act of sedition. But such crime is the law here in Canada, a ritualized loss of sovereignty that we like to call federal elections. And once again, we're all set to repeat this treasonous farce on October 19th. Now, I don't particularly care what shade of political opinion we choose to sell out our country with, whether that be Tory blue, Liberal red, NDP orange, or groovy green. These politicians, every one of them, like our puppet high school student government, all play the same deceitful game of pretending to be something they're not. And none of them who you elect on October 19th, not a single one of them, will represent or be answerable to you at all. It's the law. Just like at my old high school, our democratically elected politicians can be dismissed at any time by just one guy. In Canada's case, a colonial fossil called the Governor General, whose official title is, quote, the Queen's representative and official head of state of Canada. Well, 45 years ago, when I dared to suggest that we refuse to fund a lie posing as democracy, I experienced my first taste of public rebuke and banning. None of my fellow high schoolers wanted to even look in my direction after I spoke my heresy. Whether then or now, slaves never like to have their chains pointed out to them. But adolescents and Canadians all have to grow up eventually, and the first act of maturity is to see things as they are and not as we've been told they are. The old codger who ran our student council all those years ago was a stumbling fart named Arthur Lauer, who seemed harmless enough despite his tendency to fall asleep during student council meetings. But if Art had been caught and tried for raping some kid or stuffing a body in a garbage dump somewhere, I'd like to hope that committing such a felony would have disqualified him from being our student council's head of state. Well, sadly, no such simple logic and justice applies here in Canada, for as it turns out, an equally tottering figurehead named Elizabeth Windsor, who is the CEO of our nation, is in fact a convicted felon. She's been found guilty in International Court of Justice because on October 10th, 1964, while in Kamloops, British Columbia, Queen Elizabeth kidnapped 10 Aboriginal children who were never seen again. And she also approved the murderous residential school genocide that killed at least another 50,000 or more children. But still, that royal criminal sits on her throne, and she's deferred to and sanctioned legally by every elector, politician, cop, and judge in Canada. Does that sound right to you? Well, you know, it's not every day that every Johnny and Susie Canuck can commit not only treason, but the aiding and abetting of a convicted criminal power simply by marking an X on a ballot. We are, after all, only allotted 10 such little scratches of democracy in a lifetime. Taking responsibility for oneself and one's own nation seems to be an onerous burden for many Canadians who generally prefer to leave weighty matters of state and politics to child rapists, psychopathic lawyers, and real estate speculators. And so while surrendering our sovereignty to yet another criminal in high office is not an especially un-Canadian thing to do, it is really becoming all too banal and unjustified. However, we can all do something different, believe it or not. We can actually take back our nation. Niccolo Machiavelli, in his book The Prince, warned those of us who contemplate creating a new order of things that we will only succeed if we are armed, so that we can, if necessary, force the people to believe in our new way. Unarmed prophets, Machiavelli says, will always fail, for they must rely on the constant goodwill of the people, who are by nature fickle and easily turned. I've learned that hard lesson many times over. And so even now, when a new republic is being envisioned and established to replace the old regime of Canada, the fickle crowd waits and hesitates, even when nearly 60% of them believe that yes, the crowned head of England must indeed fall into the dust. Well, back at University Hill Secondary School, things finally did change for our body politic. Just 2 years after I called for an end to our puppet student government, we achieved precisely that. Without waiting for anybody's approval, the student body established our own weekly students' assembly, consisting of anyone who wanted to attend, debate, and vote on any matter in the school. For the first time, we all experienced self-government and the breath of liberty, but only because we had first created it for ourselves. Well, what adolescents at high school can do, even Canadians can attempt. Our new republic will be won from the ground up by establishing and maintaining such popular assemblies that will draft and enforce the laws and the Constitution of our new republic. And so instead of voting away your liberty to a corrupt foreign tyranny on October 19th, we need to shut down and shun the voting stations and convene our own local assemblies that will elect delegates to a national Republican Congress. That kind of sovereign direct action will be our answer to all of the puppets and all of the tyrants. It's called genuine democracy. It's called the Republic of Canada. And it beats slavery every time. I'm Kevin Annett. Stay tuned.